Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, and if you're new, welcome. So I am finally back. I was out of the country for a few weeks, so it was kind of a nice break from the rat race, I guess you could call it. So I did kind of like discover quite a few new things about I guess energy and like archons and whatnot while I was out of the country. So I've always kind of had this belief or like thought that, the United States is kind of like, an archon capital of the world. And this trip for me definitely confirmed that in my mind because, it's like, you can't really be sure. I haven't seen every single place in the world, but, I did go to like, I guess you could say a developing country, whatever the PC term for that is now. And it was one of the countries that the US was at war with at one point in history. So going through the War Museum and seeing all the things that we didn't learn about in school that did happen that we sort of just brush over in history classes was definitely eye-opening. And it kind of showed me that a lot of the I guess you could say war crimes or how do I say it? Environmental things that the U.S. does to other countries. We don't really know about it in the States. So anyway, besides that, so it was definitely really interesting because being in other countries, like outside the Western world, I guess you could say, is sort of like reminds you what being human sort of is supposed to feel like. Because here we're always so caught up in our heads, and I know not everyone watching is from the U.S., but I mean obviously I am. So we're always so caught up in our heads, focusing on like the next step. Okay, how do I be more productive? How do I make more money? How do I go to the best school or get, another job or buy this or buy that? There's always like something going on up in like the mental world where we're not really as grounded, or at least we're not as, I don't want to say human, but our society is sort of structured in a way where it's like everyone is just operating off of this sort of fear mindset, like, oh, I need to do this, I need to do this, I need to do this, I have to keep up, I have to make all my payments on time, and I have to keep up with all these like theoretical ideas like my credit score and things like that. So it's definitely nice to sort of get a break from that, and then realizing that although these countries might not be as wealthy or developed, it's like you go there and you realize the pace of life is almost sort of more what our brain is sort of evolved for. Because here it feels like people are always so anxious and stressed out, and it's like, well, maybe our brain hasn't evolved to keep up with like the pace of life that society demands that we sustain. But anyway, so back to what I was saying about the archons. It was really interesting because in this part of the world, I really didn't sense like hardly any archons. I mean, here and there, did I sense like one? I mean, maybe. Like, I think I sensed one on one woman, but she was like a Chinese tourist or something, so she wasn't even from the country. But yeah, overall, it just seems like people cared about, the community, each other, whereas here, we're very independent, which is sort of just like, after this trip, it sort of just seems like we just don't really care about each other versus like the individual's needs come first. It's like, well, no one's completely, individual. We all depend on each other for things. So it's kind of nice to just be reminded of that and not take like other people for just granted. So then coming back to the States, it's always kind of like, a reverse culture shock sometimes. So when I came back to the States, like people started glaring at me, and I was getting all these like, not like everyone, but like a couple people were kind of like glaring at me, or I was getting like a side eye, or there was just like this like expression on people's face like this. And I'm just like, what the hell? And then I was like, oh, right, I'm back in like the archon capital of the world. I forgot that like they're, everywhere here. And whether they're influencing a person or like attached to them or just like around them, you know, it's hard to say for sure. I don't really care a lot of the time. But yeah, it was sort of just like immediately that shift of like, oh, okay, we're back to like the archon capital. So definitely like a good reminder that like not the whole world isn't like dominated by archons, but they pick a capital and then they use the capital to sort of suppress, I guess you could say, other people around the world. And it's like, are all developed countries like that? I don't know. I haven't been to all of them since becoming, you know, like awakened, or like not awakened, but just since I started doing the spiritual stuff. I haven't really been to like any developed countries, honestly. So it does seem like Western Europe definitely has some darkness. That's probably where this whole thing started, obviously, because that's where all the, you know, colonial powers were, but it definitely feels like the U.S. is like the capital. So, you know, what does that mean for people who live in the Western world, or especially the United States? Like, what does it mean to be part of the capital? Well, it means like no matter where you go, it's like people in other countries that are developing, I feel like would have a lot more to be afraid of than we would, as far as like their physical and emotional kind of safety. Whereas here it's like, you know, what they consider poverty is a lot different than what we might consider poverty. So, but at the same time, it's like you go there and there's not this constant, in less developed countries, there's not this constant like permeating sense of fear and anxiety and pushing people sort of into their own separate boxes to make sure they're, you know, always chasing the carrot of becoming more powerful or having more money, or you know, buying new things. So it does feel like there's this overpowering sense of fear here, and I can sort of feel it as soon as I re-entered the country in my solar plexus. It started to sort of like, I could feel it sort of starting to sense that fear, and then after like a week back, it was just like, yeah, now I feel like that heaviness in that part of my body a lot of the time. If I focus on it, I mean, not like day to day, like it's not something I'm constantly focused on, but like it's just so much easier to feel that sense of fear and realize that like all of these things that we're fearing is really just, you know, the illusions that keep us sort of suppressed, I guess you could say, by the archons. But it's almost just like they need us to, you know, like in the other videos I talk about the corporations and how they, like when you create a corporation, you create a separate entity, you know, in the legal world, where it sort of becomes like its own thing, where you can, let's say, you know, corporations, like let's say there's like the owner, but they hide behind the corporations. You can't sue any kind of legal action would be through the actual corporation and not the person. So it sort of becomes like its own legal entity. And because of that, that's the perfect phase for the archons to just sort of come in. So after, you know, a certain amount of time or a certain amount of growth, like a lot of larger businesses, corporations often have like an archon that is behind the scenes sort of directing that corporation towards the archons. I guess desires or needs, and they all sort of work in like a system together. So no, they're not like all friends or whatever, but they are taking orders from the higher ups that sort of direct how this sort of system is disseminated to people. So that was sort of what I was discovering upon returning back to the United States. It definitely is not like this in other parts of the world where things feel a little more human, but here we have, you know, all the resources to decondition our minds, but when we try to do that, inevitably the archons are going to notice because, you know, they're always watching us. Okay, well, that sounded really paranoid, but they are sort of always on the lookout for, like, those, I guess, rebels or potential rebels to, like, the consciousness, the sort of reality they want us to see. So if you do sort of start to fall outside the mainstream in some way that they perceive could be influential, then they will probably take notice. But again, that's part of why I'm doing this, so that now that I've, like, had to deal with them so often, I sort of understand how they work. So that's why it seems like there is a way to, you know, decondition and then push them off in order to get back to sort of being just like a regular human. So those are my insights for the day. Stay tuned for another video I'm going to make about body snatching, or the body snatchers experience that I had recently, and I will see you next time. All right, bye.